tell everybody you're very welcome to a new brand story here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, and here we get to talk about all kinds of new technologies that help organizations safeguard their business from all types of risk and help them meet the requirements they face from a compliance perspective. And yeah, both of those things can be challenging depending on what sector you work in and the threats you face because of the technologies that you deployed and the data you collect and the teams you have running the business and protecting the business. And information is key. Understanding the risks, understanding where they come from, and understanding what's important to your business requires partnerships and support from others. And I'm thrilled to have Vinny and Bimal on from HITRUST today. Good to see you guys.
Hey, Sean. Glad to be here.
Yeah, super
Great to
fun.
see.
I love working with the HITRUST team at the Collaborate conference, and we've had many conversations around third-party risk and compliance and how to mitigate or deploy controls successfully to secure the business and also meet compliance requirements. Today we're going to be talking about the trust report that your teams pull together, and we're going to explore what that means to businesses looking to protect themselves. So before we get into all the goodness that is the trust report from HITRUST, maybe a few words from each of you about your role at HITRUST and what you're up to. Bimal, we'll start with you, and then Vinny after Bimal.
Sure. So this is Sheth. I'm the EVP of Standards Development and Assurance Operations here at HITRUST. So what that means is that my teams are responsible for developing the HITRUST CSF, our framework, and then also processing the certifications that come in, ensuring those meet our high quality standards.
And my name's Vincent Bennekers. I'm the VP of Quality at HITRUST. So our quality department really oversees the quality and integrity of all the certifications we issue, including setting the rules for the certifications, overseeing that those rules are being followed and enforcing those rules. And so our department also develops, writes, and helps produce the trust report, which I think we'll talk about here in a minute. I think you're on mute, Sean.
So now that you're sideways, Bill, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself again.
Sheth, I'm the EVP of Standards Development and Assurance Operations here at HITRUST. And so what that means is my teams are responsible for developing our framework, the HITRUST CSF, and then also processing the certifications that come in to make sure that they meet our high quality standards, and then working with customers in the post-certification process as well.
Very good. A few things going on in there, and I'm always interested in that whole process. Which, if I ask a question, we'll stay on that topic the whole day, which would be fun, but not the point of this conversation. But so, Vinny, let's get into the report. Maybe what's the history report? When was the first report written, and what was the main objective at the time?
So we started issuing the trust report last year, 2024. So we issued the first annual trust report, I think it was April 15th of 2024. Our goal with issuing the report was really to provide the market with a perspective on all the things we do at HITRUST that helps produce a reliable and relevant certification for the customer. So we knew at HITRUST that there were a lot of steps that we took to ensure the quality of those certifications, but we wanted to make sure the market knew everything that we did and really what sets HITRUST apart from some of the other certifications that are out there. And so we continued with the annual certification, annual trust report this year, where in February of this year, we issued the 2025 version of the trust report, where we looked back at some of the data points that we provided in the 2024 report, looked at were there differences, how are things trending related to the quality of our certifications and the reliability and relevance metrics that we were looking at.
And the reliability has been, I mean, quality obviously is key, but ultimately from a business perspective, the reliability is what it all boils down to. And so what are some of the elements in the report that readers should be aware of? I think you speak to like benchmarking and assurance maturity and performance
So
some of the controls.
For reliability, we have a quality assurance program here at HITRUST, where we perform a review of every assessment that gets submitted to us. And our QA analysts take a deep dive into the testing that assessors performed, ensuring that it meets all the requirements that we have set out that are needed for an organization to achieve certification. So I think it's really that third party review that we do helps set us apart from other certifications, because a lot of other assessments and certifications, there's usually the customer involved and then there's the assessor or auditor. So, but we've taken the extra step to introduce ourselves as a third party to provide additional legitimacy, and so that customers can really be able to rely on a certification and the results of that certification. The second piece of that is that relevancy that I mentioned, and I think that's very important as well for customers, because you can have a report that's reliable, but if it's not relevant for your organization, then it's not really useful for you, right? So some of the things we looked at related to relevancy are how a HITRUST assessment is tailorable for the organization, and how the assessment is able to be done at different levels, so different sets of requirements provided based on the size of the organization, based on the needs of the organization. But then also we looked at metrics related to how are organizations that are HITRUST certified, does it really provide them with that additional level of security? And I think that's where we looked at the number of breaches that HITRUST certified organizations have had. And in 2024, the first year we issued it, that was one of the key metrics that we really identified, is that 99.36% of customers who had a HITRUST certification had not reported a breach to us. And then this year in the 2025 trust report, it was a very similar number, in that 99.41% of customers had not reported a breach to us. So I don't think the 2024 number was an outlier. I think this year we really demonstrated that number is accurate and correct, in that customers are still not, HITRUST certified customers are not experiencing breaches.
Right. And yeah, so much to pull on here. So I'll just summarize this, and Bimal, I'm going to come to you in a second, because I'm going to ask a question that I held off at the beginning here. But I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to run an organization that's resilient and also compliant. Compliance hopefully drives some of the resilience, but it isn't the checkbox isn't the end game of resilience. And when customers are engaging with a business, and when businesses are engaging with each other, they want to know that whoever they're working with is doing the right things with respect to privacy and security and adhering to regulations, whatever they may be. And so so to have the certification from HITRUST says something meaningful. And then the quality numbers that you're pulling out in the report demonstrate that it is meaningful and you can trust it, hence the name of the trust report, I presume. So, this is where I want to bring you in. I'm going to put you on the spot. It might be difficult in a few minutes, but can you describe the certification process? Because I think it's important to note that HITRUST for decades has put a lot of effort into what are the risks, what are the controls that mitigate those risks, how do we identify those controls within the organization, who then should validate or verify that they're in place, and then who should invalidate that that assessment was done. And then obviously Vinny comes in with the quality to show that all of that stuff does actually indeed look good. So I did it at a high level. Maybe give some more details in that flow that will help people understand what HITRUST is doing to really give the relevancy piece and the stuff that's driving that resilience number.
Absolutely. And I think one of the first things to think about is really the construction of the framework, and how it ensures relevancy. So, one of the things that our teams do to ensure relevancy is they ingest cyber threat intelligence data. They're ingesting data from multiple providers. And what they're doing is they're mapping that data to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and looking at the techniques and the mitigations that MITRE recommends. And then from there, they are mapping high trust requirements and controls to those techniques, or to the mitigations, I should say, that MITRE recommends. And so what you have there is relevancy because you're ensuring that the assessments have the right controls in there to mitigate real world threats. So it's not someone doing a risk assessment and sitting in a room thinking about the different types of risk an organization faces. It's based on actual data of risk that threats that organizations have faced and are facing out in the wild. And once we have the framework, organizations then can go into MyCSF, our SaaS platform, and tailor their assessment based on their unique risk factors. So, the different technologies that they're using, the different compliance requirements that they may face, and that tailoring adjusts the controls that would be recommended. From there, what almost every organization does is work with an external assessor, so a professional services firm, to do a readiness assessment, make sure they understand the current state of their environment, and that assessor can help guide them on steps that they may need to take to remediate, um, or indicate that they may be ready for an actual certification. Um, and so they perform their certification once the remediation has been completed. In my CSF, they're uploading evidence. The assessor is reviewing that evidence. And really, what makes us a bit unique is that we use the control maturity model to evaluate uh, controls. So it's other other certifications and other control frameworks kind of use a pass-fail type methodology. So you say, oh, it worked or it didn't. Our approach is to say, really performance of the control can be a little bit more shades of gray rather than black and white. And there may be cases where a control didn't completely operate and maybe it partially operated. And we need to understand that it's not a complete failure, but it's also not a complete success either. And so our maturity model allows the assessor and the customer to score that control based on its performance. And from there, that scoring is then aggregated to determine if the assessment has passed the minimum bar required for certification, and what we call CAPs, or corrective action plans, are required. So these might be items and controls that scored a little lower than expected, and the organization has a little bit of remediation work left to do, but they did meet the minimum bar for certification. In some other certifications, that's really where the process ends. There's not anything else. The certification is awarded. What makes HITRUST unique is that we think, as Vinny mentioned, another layer of quality control is really necessary from us as the certification body. And so what MyCSF does is take that entire certification package and sends it to HITRUST for evaluation. And our evaluation is multifaceted, and really what we want to ensure is that the scores that are represented in that assessment truly are supported by the evidence that was collected and maintained, and they accurately reflect the control environment that customer has. So the first step in that quality assurance process is automated. We use our assurance intelligence engine, our AIE, to do multiple analytics and scanning of each assessment, looking for indicators where there may be maybe issues with the evidence, there may be some scoring challenges, or a number of other factors. That that data is then fed back for the assessor to address if there are things that the assessor needs to address, or forwarded to a QA analyst. And I think it's worth noting that 100% of HITRUST certifications are reviewed by HITRUST. We don't do a sample. We don't pick every fifth one or anything like that. Every certification is reviewed by a HITRUST QA analyst and multiple layers of HITRUST management before it's awarded. The QA analyst is using some automated tools as part of the AIE, and then they're also reviewing certain requirements and controls to again make sure that scoring is accurate. And then once all the items have been addressed that the QA analyst has found and they're satisfied, it goes through our executive reviews on the HITRUST team. So the analyst manager, and then also, I think very importantly, a member of Vinny's team will also review as well. And only then is a certification awarded and posted in my CSF for the customer to then share with their stakeholders.
And a stakeholder can be a business partner or perhaps even a third-party vendor. Well, I guess that business partner. I would say they also may receive some from their own business partner from a third party, but some of the report you can share with each other, right? Which the reliability and the scoping and the verification and all this stuff becomes even more important. Not just an internal use.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
a customer can really have any number of what we call them as relying parties. So it's those parties they want to share the HITRUST certification with, or who they need to, in some cases, if they have contractual agreements, to share the HITRUST report or certification with, to ensure they meet that level of security.
Yeah, not visibility and the credibility or reliability, as HITRUST refers to it, is super important when somebody is looking from the outside in, right? Because the spreadsheet's no good to validate.
Yeah.
A spreadsheet questionnaire saying we did this isn't nearly as good as what you guys provide, clearly.
Yeah, and I think going back to the first question on why we produced the trust report, I think when you look at those relying parties, we really wanted to give them the information around, hey, this is what we're doing on why you can trust or rely on a HITRUST certification that you're getting from your customer, right? So this is everything we do to ensure the integrity of that certification.
I think it's
And
also
yeah,
important that relying parties, those people who receive the report, um, understand that it actually produces better outcomes, right? At the end of the day, um, many people view assurance reports as kind of a check the box type exercise, right? And we wanted part of producing the trust report was to say, no, there's actually value here in having a third party come in, look at your environment using this rigorous methodology and a framework, and then you know eh, having the certification body perform more quality assurance procedures. But the end result is really tangible, and that's a significantly lower breach rate. And that's the outcome that everyone wants. And we wanted to start the conversation with those relying parties to say, the other assurance mechanisms, whatever they are that you're accepting, can they produce that same, you know, proof that they work?
Exactly. And so in this report, you're monitoring or analyzing some data points from all of these certifications and the submission packages, and you, I presume, look for trends, anomalies in the data, and the purpose of that is, one, as you described, to give relying parties a sense of more than just comfort, a sense of knowing, right? Some insight into that these certifications are relevant and accurate and in line with what businesses are facing. But then also to help perhaps them tune, or individual organizations tune their own programs to kind of get ahead of some of the trends you're seeing, or make sure that the anomalies you're seeing aren't affecting their own programs, or how does
Yeah,
that look?
yeah, definitely. I think one of the items BMO mentioned that's unique to a high trust certification is that we have scoring on each requirement, and it's based on a maturity model, right? So when an organization receives their high trust report, there's they're often not achieving the full 100 score that they could get. So I think there's always room for improvement within an organization to improve your security on really every requirement that you have. But it helps you identify, okay, which requirements are the lowest scoring. And by lowest scoring, I mean probably the less mature requirements that an organization has. And so in the trust report, one of the areas we identified is which domains are organizations scoring the lowest in. And so what we found is that it's mostly related to vulnerability management and access control. And this is also consistent with what we noted in the trust report related to what's for customers who did experience a breach and reported one to high trust. That's also similar areas that we saw that resulted in breaches. So I think when an organization looks at this report and just wants to know, okay, what do we need to focus on in maturity? I think that where most organizations struggle is related to vulnerability management. So making sure you're protected from security flaws in software and hardware, that you're implementing those necessary controls to not just protect you, but detect any security flaws. Because a lot of the breaches that were reported to us were related to 0-day vulnerabilities, which are very difficult to defend against. But if you have a detection process in place, you're able to identify those more quickly. And so I think some of these are examples of items we've noted in a trust report that will help organizations generally understand where they should focus their efforts.
And I have a few questions I want to ask, broadly, looking at what the report has in it. Are there any areas that, in addition to the one you just disclosed, any other areas that you want to highlight in terms of interesting findings or key findings?
I think one of the other areas we identified was the top 10 requirements that resulted in a CAP. And a CAP is a corrective action plan. So it's really those requirements where an organization didn't meet a sufficient level of maturity. And so when we have a CAP in a high trust certification, the organization is expected to remediate those. And so we identified the top 10. And when we look at that top 10, I think the top two requirements, which was really the most requirements that had the most caps across all organizations, were related to service providers. So that really comes down to making sure you're appropriately managing your service providers, your vendors, making sure they have the appropriate security requirements in place. And then the other item we noted in the top 10 is that 3 of the top 10 were related to access control. And so it's probably looking at in the report at those 3 requirements and seeing, hey, have we appropriately implemented these controls within our environment?
And Bima, what does that say to you and your teams? To me, it seems like perhaps it's a misunderstanding of the requirement and the necessary controls, or lack of maturity in the controls and their implementation compared to what's really required, or but that's kind of my own view. But I'm sure you have many thoughts based spending so much time in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is, um, you know, organizations are on a spectrum, right, in terms of control maturity and what their capabilities are. And I think there are opportunities, you know, I think we recognize that not everyone has, an unlimited budget to help fix some of these things. And so there are some investment opportunities for folks to really work on some of these items and help remediate them. Um, One of the more promising things I saw in the report was really around the number of organizations that use what we call external inheritance, and so this is using a third party service provider and kind of leveraging their control environment and relying on the controls that they've done. Like a great example is one of the big cloud service providers like AWS or Azure or GCP. And I think that's an opportunity for customers who may not have as significant of a security budget to stand on the shoulder of giants, really. People who are extremely sophisticated, have large security budgets, can, have robust security practices, um, and build in those environments where you just frankly have less of a surface area where you're responsible for security, and it just makes it easier and more efficient. And the 3-year trend in the trust report is does organize the number of customers who utilize that is steadily increasing. So I'm cautiously optimistic that there are opportunities for organizations to further leverage service providers like the CSPs to help build more secure environments.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations on this topic where around shared responsibility. But what you're talking about is not just a concept of shared responsibility, but an implementation of inherited controls, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool stuff. I want to maybe take a moment to think of this from the executive level and the board level. Are there any points in the report, risks or indicators that would help boards and executive teams prepare their programs better, prepare for compliance certifications in a better way?
I'll start off. I think if you're a board member or in the C-suite, I think you have to be asking your security function for uh, really a lay of the land and understanding what the risks really are, and where the exposures are, because it, transparency here is the best form of is the best form here, because once everyone starts seeing what the issues are, you can put forth action plans to remediate them. And it's not something to sweep under the rug because the consequences are too severe. And I would encourage, any executive to ask those questions and, really agree and really agree on the language it will be communicated in, because, you want something that just isn't kind of a piecemeal saying, okay, we did a deep dive on, you know, 5 controls, this year, and next year we'll pick a different 5. and see how we do. I think you really have to look at it more holistically um, in terms of the environment and get that feedback and have that communication about here's where we are, here's where we need to be, and then how do we get there? And that has to be a two-way street in terms of the communication for it to be an effective program.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think what we are seeing with high trust customers or high trust certified customers is that they are treating a high trust assessment as more than just a check the box exercise, as Bima was talking about earlier, in that we looked at the corrective actions on a year over year basis to see if customers were remediating those those issues that were identified in a high trust assessment. And what we saw was that consistently, yes, any high trust returning customers were seriously coming up with a plan and addressing those corrective actions on in the following assessment, where in an for R2 customers, they saw approximately a 20% decrease in those corrective actions year over year, whereas I1 customers had 54% fewer caps on a year over year basis. So I think the high trust customer is interested in improving their security model, and we help provide them with a path to I let them know what they need to improve upon.
Yeah. And I don't, one or both of you may be able to comment on this, but just the idea that clearly the data set you're working from are high trust certified customers. So they've already made the decision that
True.
whatever they were doing previously before high trust wasn't enough. Either somebody said, we need you to do this because you want to be a business partner, or they recognize the value of the high trust CSF and its method to improve their security posture in line with their business objectives. But something like a standard framework, an ISO framework, or I'll say the SOC 2, where a lot of organizations do it just to get a checkbox, kind of leaves them short in many ways. So I don't know if either of you can speak to the value of what high trust CSF and the certification provides, and the trust report proves that they're not going to get from just analyzing based on an ISO standard or a SOC 2 certification.
So I'll start with just going back to something Bimo had mentioned earlier on around the framework itself and our process, in that it really our requirements that are in a high trust assessment really start with a threat analysis. So we map real time threats into high trust requirements. So when an organization has an assessment, it's not just a list of controls that's sent for every organization to try and address, but it's actual threats, um, controls related to actual threats that an organization should be implementing to reduce their risk profile.
I think one of the things I focus on um, is really, you know, the market reaction. And, you know, we, I think in 2024, we actually launched our cyber insurance facility. And what this is the ability for HITRUST certified organizations to get preferential cyber insurance rates and streamlined underwriting from when they go to get a cyber policy. And to me, that's the market saying we recognize that a high trust certification has a lot of value in providing better outcomes for those organizations who achieve certification, um, because they should be rewarded with lower rates because they are less risky and the data proves that out. Um, and that was, our insurance facility has a Lloyd stamp, and I think the both the brokers and the underwriters were very excited about the product because it gave them a way to understand those organizations who have more mature control environments versus those that do not. And, you know, the feedback we got in the creation of that facility was really around, you know, yours is the tool that allows us to make that delineation, whereas we couldn't do it with other things like SOC 2 or ISO certifications, just because the quality and the controls that they're testing vary so much. Um, but with high trust, we can do this and we can make that delineation, and they're willing to put they're willing to, back it up with reduced premiums. So I think that says a lot about kind of the high trust solution.
Yeah. And we've had conversations on the cyber insurance thing, so I'll link to that episode as well for people to listen to. And I think the point I'll make in that context is you made the point of relevancy earlier, and I think scoping, because in some of the other options, it's easy to scope stuff out, and you look really good when you scope the hard stuff out and you leave the easy stuff in, and then of course you lose a lot of the relevancy, and even if you're transparent, which some of those things are hard to be transparent with, you don't know exactly what you're really getting. So I think HITRUST has a lot of detail, a lot of transparency, and of course the assurance and the reliability. I want to bring it to one more thing, and then we're going to look into the future. But there's this idea of continuous assurance, and maybe if one of you can describe what that means for folks in the context of HITRUST, and perhaps if there's anything in the report that kind of speaks to how that might look these days.
Sure, I'll kick it off, and Vinny, maybe you can talk a little bit about the report, and what we say about it. But I think for high trust, what continuous assurance means is, um, right now, every assurance mechanism, high trust included, you do a kind of this big bang, you test a bunch of controls. It's hugely time consuming, and distracting for an organization. And then you everyone celebrates when you get the report, and then you wait till the next 2 years or a year rolls around and you do the same thing over again. And no one ever questions, why isn't there something done more frequently? And this idea of continuous assurance is something that we've been percolating for many years, to say, what if you did an assessment and there were checkpoints along the way, where you're using automated automation to report back more frequently on the status of those controls, right? You know, there's telemetry coming in, it's being evaluated, and it's not that big bang. It's incremental. You do a few controls every so often, maybe every quarter, and ultimately that allows your certification to go on longer. Um, and it allows you to have more assurance that the control environment hasn't drifted, right? Or if it has drifted, you're able to detect that drift and respond much more timely than you would have in kind of the big bang method. And so we think there's a lot of value, one, just from a practical standpoint of spreading that work out, and making it easier to consume. And two, for the relying parties, those people who receive it, to understand that there was, kind of more frequent touch points. And so we're minimizing this risk of drift, that can happen in kind of the Big Bang approach.
So, and in the report itself, we talk about where we're going related to continuous assurance. And so it's probably the key future initiative that we have on our plate, because we do think this is the future of assurance, and future for customers as well. And I think what it involves for customers is it really implementing a program that allows them to monitor that their controls remain in compliance on a on a continuous basis. And then what we would do from the high trust side is test and or have it tested that they are continually monitoring those controls. And so, as Bimal mentioned, this really provides efficiencies to the customers on a regular basis as they end up with a certification that really just lives on as long as their environment is still addressing all the necessary requirements and controls.
Yeah, good stuff. And as a wrap here, I'm going to ask one or both of you, however you want to take it, but what organizations should consider looking at and prioritizing over the next 12, 18 months. And I'm just going to put out my own thought here, but then maybe some more details, or correct me if I'm completely wrong. Just the areas you mentioned: vulnerability management, access control, and I think third party was another area that we touched on. Those all three of those seem very dynamic, right? Employees coming and going, contractors coming and going, new software, new systems, new services coming and going, updates being applied, but not necessarily patches, right? Then, of course, new partners coming and going. I don't know how that looks for the rest of the analysis, if they're less dynamic. But connecting that to the continuous insurance, perhaps those are areas that organizations need to take a more dynamic approach to, perhaps. So that's my thought just based on this conversation. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on where organizations can focus, and if there's a couple nuggets of detail in there as well, please do share.
I think one area, and this is very forward-looking, is you know, AI is entering your environment, whether you like it or not, and your business partners are using AI as well. And what starting to think about what additional risk AI can introduce, whether it's your own deployment or deployments by partners, and how you start to mitigate those risks, um, especially on security, because securing AI is a bit different than securing a typical cyber environment. So I think it'd be remiss if you didn't start to consider those risks and explore them on how you mitigate them and how you monitor them. Um, and I think it's something that will change pretty regularly over the next 12 to 18 months as the AI landscape evolves and changes. But it is something that organizations need to start planning for now, and their programs may need to change as well.
I think to add on that, I think it's not just the risk of using AI, but I think organizations could um, use AI to help in their security functions as well. So as you mentioned, the areas that the organizations struggle with are those dynamic areas like access control, vulnerability management. I think there will be opportunities forthcoming where organizations can use AI to help secure their environment. And so I think organizations should look at how they can use that to enhance their security as well.
I love it. Well, good stuff. There's a ton in the report, obviously, and I think it proves that there's a lot that goes into creating the framework, analyzing the real relevant threats that organizations face that go into that, so that they can take proactive measures to control the environment to mitigate those risks, and then the whole process after to provide assurance, and then the quality control for the certification through an independent assessor that then comes and gets validated by HITRUST is super important. I mean, also, I know there's an AI certification, an assessment and certification as well that you have. So I'll link to that. We did an episode on that solution as well. So I'll link to that so folks can learn a bit more about that. So thanks for highlighting that part as a recommendation. Anything to add before we wrap here, guys?
No, nothing else. I think
No.
we covered it pretty
All
well.
right.
Right now, I'm working on what's going to go into the 2026 trust report. So I look forward to coming up with that and sharing that in the next, probably in about 6 or 7 months.
Sounds good. Well, you're welcome back here anytime to do that. It's always fun conversation and an important one as well. Sometimes difficult if you don't have the right partner in play.
Yeah.
So thank you, Bimal and Vinny, for this chat. Thanks everybody for listening to this brand story on ITSP Magazine. Please do connect with Bimal and Vinny. Connect with the HITRUST team. Look for the HITRUST report, which I'll include a link in the show notes for. And there's a few episodes that we referenced here during this conversation. I'll link to those too, so you can listen to a few more stories from HITRUST. And of course, in the brand directory on ITSP Magazine, there are a number of assets and other stories from HITRUST that you should check out. Until the next time, Bimal, Vinny, thanks a million.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.